On a bitter winter morning in rural America, Clint Harrington stood at the crossroads of desperation 3 days away from losing the farm his family had built with sweat, grit, and hard-earned pride. With debt collectors closing in and hope fading fast, Clint made a choice that would forever change his destiny. Spotting a luxury car stranded on an icy roadside, he risked the freezing cold to offer his only warm coat to a shivering stranger. Little did he know, this simple act of old-school American kindness would unleash a whirlwind of events leading him from the edge of foreclosure to a battle for redemption against banks, skeptics, and Mother Nature herself. How far can one man's generosity carry him? Stick around and find out. And if you love stories about American resilience, rugged individualism, and unexpected heroes, be sure to subscribe to our channel and join our community. Clint Harrington stood on the edge of his desolate front porch, gripping a foreclosure notice that threatened to take everything he had left. Winter winds hissed against the warped boards under his feet, and the old two-story farmhouse, weather-beaten and heavy with memories, seemed to echo that same despair. The paper in his hand spelled out exactly how many days he had before the bank would seize the land passed down from his grandfather. 3 days. 3 days to pay a mountain of debt that had accumulated over disastrous harvests, livestock losses, and escalating loan interest. He stared at the notice, feeling the chill seep not just through his worn jacket but deep into his bones. It wasn't just a matter of losing property. It was the possible end of the one place his family had poured their blood, sweat, and tears into for generations. Inside, the worn oak table was cluttered with unpaid bills, loan letters stamped in red, and an old tin box filled with receipts from better times. Each letter was a reminder that the family heritage, Harrington Farm, was on the verge of collapse. Years ago, the orchard out back had thrived, his mother's prized apple trees whose blossomed pink each spring, and his father had taught him how to graft branches for an even hardier crop. But all that felt like a distant dream now. In recent years, freak storms and floods ravaged the orchard, destroying the irrigation lines. Crop yields plummeted, and without consistent sales, the mounting debt became a slow chokehold. Clint's father, George Harrington, had been the backbone of this place, rugged, taciturn, and infinitely patient with the land. When George passed away 2 winters ago, Clint tried to preserve each tradition, from the careful way of turning the soil to the handcrafted irrigation system that once worked flawlessly. But times had changed, weather patterns were erratic, and big agricultural firms dominated the market. Clint, pushing 64, found himself drowning in the complexities of bank negotiations he barely understood. The local credit union had shown mercy at first, but eventually sold his loan to a larger institution. Now they wanted the farm or their money, whichever was easiest. Realizing time was running out, Clint decided to spend the last of his savings on chicken feed, a few cords of firewood, and some materials to fix his battered old truck. He had a plan, if it could even be called that, to load his truck with eggs, firewood, and homemade apple cider, then head to the county road to try selling whatever he could. If luck smiled, passing motorists might grab a stack of wood or a jug of cider, and maybe that would buy him another day or two to negotiate. He remembered his father's voice, "Never quit fighting for this land. Son, it's more than dirt, it's our legacy." Those words rang in his head constantly, urging him forward despite his exhaustion. That morning's bitter cold bit at his face as he trudged to the barn. A swirl of snow danced in the gray sky, hinting at worse weather coming. He didn't own decent winter gear anymore. He had sold or pawned many personal items to make ends meet. Yet he kept one thick coat, an old relic that had belonged to his father before him. Slipping it on, he whispered a small prayer that maybe, somehow, the next 72 hours would bring a miracle. If not, he might lose the only place he ever called home. 2 hours later, Clint pulled his rusted pickup onto the shoulder of a lonely highway. The truck sputtered as he idled, sending a faint puff of exhaust into the frosty air. He glanced across the bleak landscape fields stretched in every direction, covered in a thin layer of snow, with skeletal trees marking property lines. Off in the distance, a row of hills loomed, the summits blurred by the flat, gray sky. Everything about this late winter scene felt as though the world had gone quiet and cold, matching Clint's morale. After stepping out, he straightened the hand-painted sign strapped to the side of his truck bed. Firewood, eggs, cider, Harrington Farm. The letters were chipped from repeated use, but it was the best he could manage. He then set out a wooden crate of eggs, meticulously cleaned and arranged, alongside 2 jugs of amber-hued cider. A neatly stacked half-quart of split logs leaned against the side of the truck bed. He hoped that passing drivers would see the sign, pull over, and help him make a small profit enough to at least cover the next payment on his loan. Or maybe just enough to pay the overdue electric bill so the house wouldn't plunge into complete darkness at night. The wind quickly gnawed at the edges of his frayed jacket, making him shiver. He'd brought his father's heavier coat, but it lay folded in the passenger seat of the truck. Since business was typically slow, he intended to hold off wearing it until the chill became too intense. The initial hours ticked by with a kind of painful unease. A handful of cars whooshed past, but only a few slowed to look. Clint sold some eggs to a local teacher, returning from an early morning shift, then a small bundle of wood to an older couple whose heater had broken. The transactions were meager, mere specks in the ocean of debt he owed, yet he remained stoic. As his father had taught him, never let despair show too openly. By noon, the temperature dropped even further, and a sharp wind whipped across the open fields. The forecast had warned of plummeting temperatures and a possible storm. Clint's breath crystallized in the air as he checked the crates, making sure the eggs hadn't frozen. Gritting his teeth, he wiped the frost off his sign and tried to stamp some life back into his feet. He was debating whether to pack up and head home before the real storm hit when, in the distance, he spotted something unusual. A black sedan, clearly high-end, weaving erratically along the road. It approached with a hiss of tires, then rattled to a stop about 50 yards away. The engine gave a strained groan, and all fell silent. Clint expected the driver to call for a tow truck or simply step out and check under the hood. But minutes passed, and no one emerged. Eventually, the driver's door opened, revealing a petite figure wearing what looked like a mere sweatshirt. The silhouette wavered in the icy wind, stumbling around to inspect one of the tires. Alarmed at how lightly dressed she was, Clint felt a jolt of concern override his usual caution. If that person stayed out here for long without warm clothing, hypothermia was a real threat. And if the vehicle's engine was dead, she had only the sub-zero air for company. Clint fetched the thick coat from inside his truck, pausing only briefly as he hesitated to give away the one substantial piece of winter gear he possessed. But deep inside, he recalled his father's words about never ignoring someone in need, especially on a day as brutally cold as this. Tucking the coat under his arm, he trudged across the icy gravel shoulder, snow crunching beneath each heavy step. The wind howled in short bursts, sending chills down his spine even through his old jacket. But his eyes were set on the figure near the sedan, who was now pacing nervously around the front bumper. As he drew closer, he could see the woman's breath hanging in the air, each exhale a cloud of desperation. She looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s, with pale features reddened by the freezing temperatures. Her dark hair was pulled into a small ponytail that whipped in the wind, and her sweatshirt, clearly inadequate for these conditions, clung stiffly to her shivering frame. She glanced at Clint warily, as if unsure whether to trust a stranger appearing out of nowhere. But her teeth chattered too hard for her to speak first. "Ma'am," Clint said, stopping a respectful distance away, "it's too cold out here for just a sweatshirt. You're gonna catch your death. Let me lend you this coat." With that, he draped the warm coat across her shoulders. At first, she started to protest, but the wave of relief from the coat's warmth seemed to overpower her pride. She mumbled a shaky thank you as she clutched it closed, tears threatening to spill at the unexpected kindness. Clint introduced himself. "Name's Clint Harrington, but I've been selling a few things up the road. Looks like your tire might be stuck. Or your engine's giving you trouble. Could I help you get it going again?" She managed to whisper her name, Angela Dawson, still clearly rattled. With numb fingers, she tried starting the car once more, producing only a distressed sputter from the engine. Clint noticed that the front right tire had sunk partially into a small snowdrift near the ditch. Even if the engine fired up, the vehicle likely needed a push to regain traction. The next few minutes saw Clint bracing himself against the front bumper while Angela turned the ignition, gently applying gas. The tires spun, spraying ice and slush, until finally the car lurched forward. Angela's face lit up with a blend of hope and sheer exhaustion as the sedan rolled onto firmer ground, panting from the effort. Clint slipped a bit on the icy road but caught himself just in time. With the car free, Angela stepped out, still wrapped in Clint's heavy coat, and offered a trembling smile. "You saved me back there," she said between shivers. "I'd been stuck for nearly half an hour. My phone lost signal, and I was terrified nobody would stop." Clint waved off her gratitude, simply relieved she was safe. She asked if she could pay him for his trouble, fumbling through the coat pockets for money, but Clint refused. All he wanted was to ensure she wasn't stranded in these treacherous conditions. "I've got a thermos of hot cocoa in my truck," he added, noticing how her teeth still chattered. "It'll warm you up for the drive. No sense driving off half frozen." Angela followed Clint to his pickup, stepping gingerly over the slick patches of ice. She kept the coat cinched tight around her shoulders, as if afraid to lose even a trace of warmth. Opening the passenger door, Clint dug out a dented old thermos. He unscrewed the lid, and the aromatic steam of cocoa wafted upward. He poured some into the thermos cap and handed it to her. She wrapped both hands around it, sipping carefully, every inhale of hot steam loosening the tension etched into her face. While she drank, Clint took a moment to observe her car more closely. He couldn't help but note how luxurious the interior looked. Leather seats, a digital dashboard, some fancy brand emblem on the grille. It was definitely out of place on these rural backroads, especially during a winter storm. He might have assumed she was just passing through, but something about her appearance suggested a deeper story. Maybe she was fleeing something, or maybe she simply made a poor decision to travel this route without checking the weather. Either way, he couldn't shake a feeling that there was more to Angela than met the eye. When she finished the cocoa, she looked at Clint with gratitude that went beyond polite thanks. "I really can't thank you enough," she said softly. "You gave me your coat, helped push my car out of the snow, and won't even take my money." Her voice faltered as though tears threatened to form. Clint shrugged, trying to keep things simple. "It's just a coat, ma'am. You needed it more than I did at the moment." He gestured to the rest of his wares in the truck bed. "Anyway, I have firewood and some cider for sale if you want them. But no pressure. I'm just glad you're all right." Angela glanced at the sign. "I could use some wood." "Actually," she said, her shivering calmer now. "And the eggs, maybe even the cider, if you can spare them. I just need to grab my purse from the trunk." Then she frowned, remembering something. "Oh, wait. I put my wallet somewhere inside, but I—" She trailed off, hesitant. Clint quickly shook his head. "Don't worry about it. I can't in good conscience charge you for that coat or the cocoa. If you really want the wood and eggs, we'll figure out payment another time. Your safety's the main thing." He noticed her fumbling for words. Maybe she was embarrassed, or maybe the shock of nearly freezing on the roadside still rattled her. Finally, she sighed and offered a small, tight-lipped smile. "All right, I'll come back or mail you a check once I get everything sorted." She took another lingering sip of cocoa and handed the thermos cap back. "I promise I won't forget what you did today." Clint watched as Angela returned to her sedan. The engine still sounded strained, but it turned over without too much fuss. She rolled down the window, peering at him one last time. Under that coat, she looked almost like a child draped in an adult's garment, overwhelmed, yet relieved. With a final wave, she drove off, disappearing into the pale horizon. The entire encounter left Clint's heart both heavy and oddly buoyant. He'd lost his best piece of winter gear, but somehow the gesture felt necessary, like a faint spark of decency in an otherwise merciless season. Clint stood by the roadside, the wind biting through his thin jacket now that his father's heavy coat was gone. The departing sedan left a cloud of exhaust that quickly dissolved into the freezing air. As the hum of the engine faded, the stillness of the empty highway enveloped him, and reality hit he had just parted with something irreplaceable, especially in this bitter season. A pang of worry nagged at him. He wasn't a young man anymore, and extended time in the cold could lead to pneumonia or worse. Yet there was a strange warmth in his chest, a sense that he'd done what was right. The rest of the afternoon yielded minimal sales. Clint's signs swayed in the wind, the smell of burning oil from his truck drifting lazily into the crisp air. By 3 o'clock, he recognized the early onset of dusk in winter. Only a faint, pale sunlight remained, reflecting off the ice patches on the asphalt. Packing up the unsold firewood and eggs, he wrestled with a bleak calculus. There was no way the money he'd made would cover the mortgage arrears. He drove home slowly, keeping one eye on the battered fuel gauge, half hoping he wouldn't run out of gas before reaching Harrington Farm. The interior heater was feeble at best, but he cranked it to its highest setting, missing the thick coat more than he'd like to admit. Back at the farmhouse, he lit the old wood stove with leftover scraps. The building moaned against the wind outside, every gust causing the windows to rattle. In the dim glow of a single lamp, Clint wearily flipped through a stack of final notices from the bank. Each letter was more severe than the last, the tone turning from formal caution to almost predatory threats. The final one specified that by Friday, just 3 days away, the property would be seized if the full amount wasn't paid. He stared at the date, etched in bold type. 3 days. He muttered, might as well be 3 hours for all the good it does me. He forced himself to eat a simple dinner, a couple of eggs, and some bread. A paltry meal. The taste brought him back to childhood memories, his mother's homemade pies, the smell of fresh apple slices combined with cinnamon. Sometimes he thought he could still hear her humming in the kitchen, that sense of nostalgia. However, clashed painfully with the present predicament. Finishing his meager supper, he decided to call Wallace, an old friend in town who used to help him with mechanical repairs and the occasional farm chore. Maybe Wallace would have some idea about short-term loans or a lead on a buyer for some of Clint's old machinery. But after a few rings, Wallace's phone went to voicemail. Clint didn't bother leaving a message. What could he say? I'm about to lose everything. Have any miracles to spare instead? He quietly placed the phone back on its cradle and watched the snow swirl outside the nearest window. The orchard lay invisible under a blanket of night. If the bank claimed the land, he feared they'd bulldoze those apple trees in the spring, turning the place into a soulless industrial farm or selling it off for commercial development. The thought twisted his gut. Needing rest, he settled near the wood stove, half wrapped in a tattered quilt. Despite the raging wind, his mind drifted to the roadside scene earlier, the way Angela's eyes brimmed with relief once the coat enveloped her. Maybe she'd call, maybe she wouldn't. Still, in that one fleeting moment, he had felt a sliver of purpose. And sometimes that was all a man had. Morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains, revealing a new layer of snow blanketing the yard. Clint rose stiffly, his joints complaining about yesterday's exertions. He performed his usual routine, checking on the meager flock of chickens, feeding them what little feed he could afford, then trudging through the orchard to survey the damage. Broken branches, soggy ground from the last thaw, and a handful of stunted trees told the story of years of neglect. Where once rows of apples thrived, now half the orchard stood barren, with many trees uprooted by floods or starved of proper irrigation. By 8 o'clock, he was back in the kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee, no sugar left in the house. Thoughts swirled about how to stave off the inevitable foreclosure. Perhaps he could try another day at the roadside, but with the storm forecast, he might not see a single car. Maybe he could sell some of the orchard equipment for scrap, but that was a heartbreaking last resort. The sense of hopelessness thickened like the heavy clouds outside. A sudden rumble of an engine outside snapped him from his brooding. He peered through the window and caught his breath. A sleek, black SUV with tinted windows eased up his long, snowy driveway. It wasn't a local sheriff's car or a standard pickup from a neighbor. It looked more like a corporate vehicle. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through him. Was the bank already here to assess the property? Bracing himself, Clint stepped onto the porch just as the SUV's door opened. A man in a tailored suit jumped out, quickly circling to open the rear passenger door. Out stepped a poised woman in a stylish winter coat, white and fur-trimmed, standing in stark contrast to the bleak surroundings. Her boots crunched on the snow as she approached, a small staff of two others trailing behind her. Clint's heart pounded in suspicion. This felt like the kind of entourage you'd see in big city boardrooms, not on a failing farm in the middle of nowhere. He was about to greet them tersely when the woman pulled back her hood, and he recognized her face, Angela Dawson. Gone was the shivering figure from yesterday's roadside. Here stood someone who exuded confidence and authority. She clutched something draped over her arm, and Clint realized it was the very coat he had lent her. "Mr. Harrington," Angela said, her voice carrying a calm assurance. "I believe I owe you a visit." Clint couldn't summon words for a moment. The transformation in her appearance was disorienting. Yesterday, he'd thought her just another stranded traveler. Now, she looked every bit a corporate executive. He remembered how fancy her sedan had been, how out of place on these roads. Had he misjudged everything Angela introduced her team? One was Marcus, her legal advisor, and the other was Diana, an agriculture specialist. Clint tried not to let his nerves show. Even without a good coat, he stood firm in the cold air, wanting to maintain a semblance of dignity. Angela extended the old coat toward him. "I came to return this," she said with a gentle smile. "But also, I wanted to talk to you about something important, something that might help you, if you're willing to hear me out." Clint felt a flicker of hope and doubt wrestle inside him. He nodded, stepping aside to invite them into his kitchen. Whatever her proposition, he was in no position to dismiss any offer of help. Inside, Clint felt acutely aware of how shabby his kitchen must seem to these suited professionals. The ancient linoleum floor had cracks patched with duct tape. The faucet dripped incessantly, and the only heating came from a small electric space heater that glowed in the corner. Angela and her team sat at the scarred wooden table, politely refusing to remove their coats, whether out of courtesy for the cold or to keep their professional air. He couldn't tell. Clint settled on a rickety chair, crossing his arms to mask his unease. With a slight nod, Angela began. She explained that she was the CEO of Evergreen Solutions, a major firm specializing in sustainable technology and agricultural innovation. The night before, after escaping the snowdrift with Clint's help, she had done some research on local farms, particularly his. "I saw your orchard, your fields," she said quietly, hands clasped on the table. "It broke my heart to see so much potential going to waste. I know about the floods, the failing irrigation, the debt notices." Clint's jaw tightened at the mention of his private affairs. But Angela pressed on. "Evergreen Solutions," she explained, had a program that invested in struggling farms, installing solar-powered irrigation systems, modern greenhouses, and advanced drainage solutions to mitigate extreme weather. In exchange, the farm would become part of their organic supply chain, selling produce under the Evergreen label for a guaranteed price. Normally, they partnered with larger cooperatives, but Angela wanted to use Clint's property as a pilot site for a more personal, community-focused project. "I'm here because you showed kindness without expecting anything in return," she said. "Now I'd like to do the same for you." Marcus, the legal advisor, laid out a folder of documents. He explained the terms. Evergreen would install new infrastructure at no upfront cost, help refinance Clint's mortgage, and arrange for the orchard's revival. In return, Clint had to maintain certain organic standards, produce for a set minimum each season, and keep the land in agricultural use for the duration of the contract. Diana, the agriculture specialist, added that she saw prime soil in parts of the orchard, with potential for robust apple and pear crops if the irrigation was fixed. Listening intently, Clint felt a swirl of skepticism, hope, and a twinge of pride. Was this too good to be true? He flipped through the documents, eyes skimming the legal jargon. The idea of strangers swooping in, altering the farm, and dictating how he should grow his crops made him uneasy. Yet the bank notices haunted him. He had 3 days to find a solution. Angela's offer seemed like a bridge across a canyon. He cleared his throat. "I appreciate the gesture, truly, but I need time." I've always run this farm my way. Giving up control isn't something I can decide in a snap. Angela nodded. I understand. Mr. Harrington, take the time you need. We can come back tomorrow or the day after. But please do read everything. See if it aligns with your values. We're not here to steal your land. We want you to keep it and to thrive. If you decide it's not for you, I'll respect that. A tension he hadn't realized he carried suddenly loosened. Clint exhaled, thanking them for their visit. Marcus and Diana placed business cards on the table, detailing phone numbers and email addresses. Angela once more offered the thick coat she'd borrowed. Clint accepted it this time, the warmth seeping into his chilled limbs as they rose to leave. Before stepping out, Angela paused in the doorway. You saved me out there, Mr. Harrington. Let me try to save your farm. With that, the SUV disappeared down the driveway, leaving Clint under the soft hum of the space heater, cradling the coat in both arms. That evening, Clint wrestled with the folder Angela had given him. He closed every window curtain partly to keep out the cold, partly because the sense of vulnerability gnawed at him. With a single overhead light illuminating the kitchen table, he placed the documents down, smoothing out the pages. The jargon was dense exclusive supply agreements, installment of photovoltaic modules, organic certification requirements. Each section felt like diving into a foreign language. But the gist was clear enough. Evergreen Solutions would save his property from foreclosure by providing the capital to upgrade it. In return, he had to commit to growing produce under their guidelines for a set term. If all went well, he'd keep ownership, gain a stable income, and watch the orchard thrive again. Still, something in Clint's old-fashioned heart resisted. He'd grown up believing in self-reliance, fix your own fences, pay your own debts, and stand on your own 2 feet. But the modern world had changed. Now, big agricultural companies set prices and dominated the markets. Without the orchard functioning at full tilt, he'd had no chance to compete. The bank's ultimatum weighed heavily on him. 3 days. No matter how he turned it around in his mind, he saw no other path. He couldn't sell enough eggs, wood, or cider to erase the debts. And yet, the farm was more than a business. It was his family's identity. He picked up the phone and tried Wallace again, who finally answered, sounding groggy. Wallace, Clint said, voice quivering despite himself. I need your help looking over some documents. I've got a proposition from a company that wants to invest here. It's big, could change everything. Wallace, an old friend who had once been a school teacher, agreed to come by that night. Half an hour later, a battered Ford truck pulled up outside. Wallace entered, stomping snow off his boots, the smell of coffee clinging to his jacket. Clint spread the papers out, explaining the situation in halting words. Wallace studied them methodically, flipping from page to page. Occasionally, he'd mutter, or purse his lips. After nearly an hour, Wallace looked up with raised eyebrows. Clint, I'm no contract lawyer, but this doesn't read like a swindle. It's actually quite fair. They install new irrigation, solar panels, even a greenhouse. You keep the land, but you supply them with produce. The question is, can you handle that kind of operation? Clint rubbed his temple. I have no idea. My orchard's in ruins. My irrigation lines are shot. They're talking about advanced systems I can't begin to understand. Wallace gave a reflective nod. But think about it. They'll bring specialists. They'll train you. And from what I can tell, if you produce under the standards they want, organic, sustainable, you'll have a guaranteed buyer. That alone is more security than you've had in ages. They talked late into the night, analyzing every page. Clint felt torn between pride and necessity, but the clock was ticking. Finally, around midnight, and he shut the folder, jaw set. I'll give Angela Dawson a call in the morning, he said softly. If this is the only way to keep Harrington Farm in the family name, then so be it. Wallace clapped him on the shoulder. I think you're doing the right thing. Clint, sometimes we gotta accept help, especially when it's offered with genuine respect. Early the next day, Clint woke to the sound of howling wind. The storm from the forecast had arrived. Outside, Fine shards of ice blew sideways, stinging any exposed skin. Normally, he'd have cursed the weather, but today his mind was fixed on a more pressing matter. He inhaled deeply, bracing himself for the phone call. With trembling hands, he dialed the number Angela had left. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm yet professional. "Mr. Harrington, good morning. I hope you're keeping warm in that coat, trying to keep composure." Clint stated that he wanted to proceed, but he wanted to meet with her team once more to ensure there were no hidden catches. Angela agreed, offering to drive out immediately. Despite the storm, she insisted. "We've got a four-wheel drive and a driver who's used to rough conditions," she said. "And honestly, time is of the essence. I know about your 3-day deadline." Clint hung up, feeling the swirl of relief and anxiety intensify. True to her word, Angela arrived by midday, along with Marcus and Diana. The SUV inched up the driveway, tires crunching through fresh drifts of snow. Once inside, the trio removed their layers, revealing professional suits beneath. Marcus came equipped with updated documents, and Diana carried a tablet loaded with data about Harrington Farm soil analysis, weather patterns, potential yield estimates. Clint marveled at how quickly they'd gathered so much information. Angela explained that upon learning his identity, she had authorized an in-depth study overnight, using satellite imagery and old county records. They sat around the same battered kitchen table, a fresh pot of coffee in front of them. Marcus guided Clint through the contract line by line. "Our legal department's refined a few details," he said, pointing out additions that would safeguard Clint's ownership. They'd also added a clause ensuring that if the partnership dissolved, all improvements would remain on the farm. No hidden fees, no hidden triggers. Clint nodded, wariness still evident in his eyes, but a flicker of hope lingered. Diana then showed him projected revenues. If the orchard was revitalized with new irrigation and pest management, yield could triple in 2 years. Coupled with greenhouse operations, he could provide fresh produce year-round. Evergreen Solutions has a wide distribution network, Diana explained. "We'll handle marketing, shipping, and brand awareness. You just focus on growing quality crops with our sustainable methods." Clint was silent, absorbing the information. Part of him worried about technology overshadowing the old traditions. But Diana assured him the approach would blend both conventional wisdom and modern efficiency. Finally, Angela handed over a pen. "Clint," she said quietly, "I won't pressure you. But I believe in this. I believe in you. If you trust us, we can save your farm and maybe set an example of what's possible in sustainable farming." Outside, the storm raged, snow beating against the window panes. Inside, the tension felt similarly fierce, but for different reasons. Clint inhaled, glancing at the photos pinned to his fridge, his father standing by a tractor, his mother holding a bushel of apples. After a weighted pause, he signed. And with that act, the inertia of Harrington Farm's downfall shifted. Angela and her colleagues smiled, relief evident in their faces. Handshakes followed. Clint tried to keep his emotions in check, but his eyes misted. "I just pray I'm not making a fool's gamble," he said, voice rough with unspoken fear. Angela touched his forearm gently. "It's not a gamble. It's a partnership. Now let's get to work." Work began almost immediately, as if a sleeping giant had awakened on Harrington Farm. Over the next week, trucks arrived bearing lumber, solar panels, and various equipment. Despite the frozen ground, construction crews set about installing a framework for what would become a state-of-the-art irrigation system, powered by solar arrays set along the south-facing slope of the property. Clint observed with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Workers in bright safety vests drove steel posts and unrolled cables. He'd spent decades wrestling with hoses and pumps that frequently broke. Now, these experts moved with precision, using high-tech tools and referencing detailed schematics that Diana had drawn up. Amid the bustle, Angela visited regularly, sometimes braving the muddy drive after a slight thaw. During each visit, she balanced her corporate grace with genuine curiosity, peppering Clint with questions about the orchard's history. She seemed fascinated by the stories of his grandfather planting the initial apple saplings after returning from World War II, or how his mother had won county fair ribbons for her apple pies. Each anecdote she heard solidified her resolve that this project was about more than numbers. It was about preserving a legacy. The orchard itself needed a thorough overhaul. Years of flood damage had left roots waterlogged, soil compacted. Diana and her agricultural team pruned dead branches, carted away the debris, and introduced new saplings to fill gaps. They tested soil pH, introduced compost mixes, and mapped out a plan for crop rotation. Clint was skeptical at first, since orchard management had always been a family tradition passed down through word of mouth. But seeing their expertise, he grudgingly admitted to himself that their approach might resurrect the orchard faster than he ever could alone. Meanwhile, a smaller, temporary greenhouse was erected near the barn for winter produce. Inside this sturdy frame, rows of lettuce, spinach, and herbs were planted, all fed by water lines connected to the new solar-powered pump system. Sensors monitored humidity and soil moisture, adjusting the irrigation flow automatically. One crisp morning, Clint nearly jumped when an alarm pinged on a tablet device that Diana had given him. It signaled low moisture in one row. She showed him how a simple tap on the screen could add more water. No manual hauling of hoses needed. He shook his head in disbelief, marveling at how technology had shrunk what used to be hours of labor into a few keystrokes. Local folks soon caught wind of the commotion at Harrington Farm. Some neighbors whispered that Clint had sold out to the suits, while others eyed the new solar panels with envy. A few curious souls stopped by to ask about the changes, and Clint, in his guarded way, tried to explain the partnership. He noticed a spark of interest in other older farmers dealing with similar weather woes. One neighbor, a woman named Cheryl, timidly asked if she might come see the greenhouse to learn about the sensors. Clint found himself becoming an unexpected ambassador for sustainable farming, a role he never imagined. Through it all, the bank hounded him less. Thanks to the refinancing Evergreen Solutions arranged, the days of panic-stoking foreclosure notices slowed to a trickle. Each evening, Clint collapsed into bed, bone-tired from overseeing the orchard work. But for the first time in years, a glimmer of optimism lit his thoughts. Spring was still a ways off, yet it felt like hope had arrived early, rooted in solar panels and greenhouse seeds. Not everyone in their community welcomed the transformation. Rumors circulated that Clint had invited a corporate takeover, and a few old-timers in the local diner clucked their tongues at the sight of high-tech installations on farmland. One day, while picking up feed at the farm supply store, Clint overheard two men gossiping in hushed tones. "Solar panels on an apple farm." "Ain't right," grumbled one. "He's letting those city folks walk all over him," added the other. Though the words stung, Clint kept his head high. The old orchard had nearly died under his watch. If these modern innovations could revive it, who was he to turn them away? Wallace, however, became an unlikely champion for Clint's new venture. Whenever cynics questioned the partnership, Wallace pointed to the orchard's dramatic improvements. "Look, if it keeps Harrington Farm afloat, then we all benefit. Better to have a living orchard than more abandoned land." The majority of townspeople gradually came around, especially when they saw trucks labeled Evergreen Solutions hauling away boxes of freshly harvested winter greens. The local grocery soon stocked produce from Harrington Farm under an organic, locally grown label. Shoppers noticed how crisp and flavorful the greens were, not to mention the pride that came from supporting a local farm. Meanwhile, inside the greenhouse, the first test yields were remarkably successful. Lettuce heads grew lush, spinach leaves broad, and herbs fragrant. Clint, initially uneasy about digital monitors, discovered a certain pleasure in seeing the data confirm what his eyes observed: healthy soil moisture, optimal temperature ranges, minimal pest intrusion. Each time he typed in a few commands to adjust water flow, he felt a small thrill. Perhaps old dogs could learn new tricks after all. The orchard, though still in the early stages of revival, no longer appeared lifeless. Diana's crew had grafted several new branches onto surviving trunks, and fresh green buds peeked out from where there had been only brittle twigs. "We can expect a modest apple crop in late summer," Diana reported. "The real bounty will come next year, Once the trees are fully rehabilitated, Clint stroked one of the trunks, recalling how he'd once carved his initials into the bark as a 10-year-old. The orchard had always been part of his identity, and now it felt poised to stand proud again. Angela continued to visit regularly, though her schedule was hectic. Clint could never quite guess when she might appear. Sometimes it was a Monday morning with a local camera crew, other times a weekend afternoon to discuss orchard expansions. On one such afternoon, she showed up with a small group of interns who recorded every inch of Harrington Farm, from the orchard rows to the aging barn. "We want to document this pilot program so other farms can see what's possible," she told Clint. He managed to keep his nerves in check around the cameras, focusing on demonstrating how the new irrigation worked. The interns seemed wide-eyed, capturing drone footage of the orchard's neat lines and the glint of solar panels in the distance. At night, Clint often found himself too excited to sleep. Despite the tension with a few neighbors, the orchard was no longer a source of shame. The possibility of an abundant harvest, a future free from foreclosure, and a renewed sense of purpose kept him awake thinking, planning, and occasionally smiling at the memory of handing over that coat to Angela on the coldest day of winter. Winter gradually loosened its icy grip, and the orchard transitioned from stark brown branches to the early hints of green. Meltwater trickled into drainage ditches that Evergreen Solutions had fortified to handle heavier runoffs. For the first time in years, Harrington Farm seemed prepared for the season's change. When the snows fully receded, Angela arranged an on-site progress review. Her team, Marcus, Diana, and a handful of technicians walked the property with Clint, examining the orchard, greenhouse, and newly installed solar arrays. During this review, Diana pointed out that the orchard's soil composition had improved thanks to strategic composting and better drainage. The row of young saplings was thriving, protected from flood threats by berms constructed to divert excess water. They moved through each row, checking for bud formation. Clint couldn't help but recall childhood memories of how he'd run among these trees, chasing after fallen blossoms. Back then, the orchard felt like an enchanted forest. Now it was undergoing its own renaissance, guided by a mix of tradition and technology. The group reconvened at the barn, which had been partially repaired to store the greenhouse supplies. Marcus opened a notebook, discussing finances and contract milestones. "We're well on track for a profitable first yield in the greenhouse," he said, making eye contact with Clint. "In fact, some local businesses are already asking to stock more produce. We anticipate a robust orchard harvest in late summer, enough to supply not just local vendors, but possibly a regional chain Angela has connections with." Clint felt equal measures of excitement and trepidation. Could the orchard truly produce that much? So soon Marcus insisted the data supported it, while Angela shot Clint a confident smile. Angela then addressed a detail that caught Clint off guard: an open house or farm tour event. She proposed inviting local officials, journalists, and perhaps neighboring farmers to witness the transformation. "It's not just about Evergreen Solutions," she emphasized. "It's about showing how any struggling farm can adapt, with the right support and mindset." Clint rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Public gatherings weren't his forte, and he hated the idea of crowds swarming over the orchard. Yet he recognized the potential benefit. If people saw the success, it could spark more community support, possibly more sales. "All right," he said finally, "but keep it small. I'm not set up for a giant carnival." Preparations began, though at a measured pace. The stormy unpredictability of spring weather meant the ground was still soggy in parts, so they picked a date a few weeks out, hoping for drier conditions. Meanwhile, Angela's marketing team started generating flyers, working with Clint to ensure any promotional material captured the farm's story accurately. He insisted they include mentions of his grandfather, the orchard's heritage, and the values that once defined Harrington Farm. Late one afternoon, after the team had left, Clint wandered among the rows of budding apple trees alone. He cradled a single branch laden with tiny buds, carefully inspecting its progress. Each bud represented a fragile promise, an opportunity for growth, a symbol of resilience. He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of fresh earth mixed with the lingering crispness of spring air. For a moment, he imagined his father standing there, strong and silent, nodding approval. That fleeting vision fueled him, reminding him that what he and Angela had embarked upon was indeed a second chance for Harrington Farm, no matter what the skeptics said. The morning of the open house arrived with an almost theatrical brightness, a cloudless sky, mild temperatures, and a gentle breeze that rustled the orchard's new leaves. Workers bustled around, setting up a modest reception area by the barn. They arranged folding chairs, tables of pamphlets showcasing Evergreen Solutions technology, and a couple of banner stands featuring photographs of Harrington Farm from a few months prior, bare, bleak, and seemingly on the verge of ruin. Beside those images, new snapshots showed the orchard's current vibrancy and the solar arrays gleaming under spring sunlight. Angela and her team showed up early, wearing more casual attire to blend in with the farm atmosphere. Clint, feeling a tad self-conscious, wore a neatly pressed flannel shirt and his father's reconditioned coat. He had grown to cherish the new coat Angela had gifted him, but for this special day, he wanted to wear something that bore a direct connection to the Harrington legacy. Wallace arrived soon after, along with a couple of local farmhands. They volunteered to help direct visitors and answer basic questions about the orchard's history. By midday, a small but steady stream of guests arrived. Among them were local officials from the County Agricultural Board, curious neighbors who'd been hearing rumors of high-tech gear in the orchard, and a few reporters with notepads and cameras. Although Clint felt his stomach twist whenever a new wave of arrivals pulled up in cars, Angela encouraged him to mingle. She stood beside him, introducing him as the co-owner of this successful pilot project. Though Clint still saw himself as just a caretaker of family land, the short presentation began near the greenhouse. Diana led the group inside, where neat rows of lettuce, spinach, and herbs thrived under precisely controlled conditions. She explained how sensor-driven irrigation maximized efficiency. The visitors marveled at the crisp greens, and the fresh smell of earth seemed to awe them more than any chart or graph could. Next, they walked the orchard path, stopping at various points where new saplings interspersed with older, revived trees. Clint demonstrated how the solar panels powered the pumps, ensuring the orchard received water without draining the farm's budget or the environment's resources. Occasionally, a neighbor or local official would pull Clint aside. They'd ask him if he truly felt in control. If partnering with a large corporation meant losing the farm's soul, "It's still my land," he'd answer softly, "but now I've got the means to keep it growing, instead of watching it die." At times, Angela would step in to elaborate on how Evergreen's contract contained clauses protecting the farm's ownership. The more they spoke, the more the crowd seemed to warm to the concept. The highlight came when Angela invited everyone to gather near a makeshift podium by the barn for some concluding remarks. She recounted how she and Clint met under the harshest of winter conditions her car stuck, freezing in inadequate clothing, and how Clint's selfless acts sparked a partnership that no one could have predicted. Listening from the neath, Clint felt tears press at the corners of his eyes. He never imagined his quiet gesture would lead to this moment, surrounded by well-wishers and local press. As Angela finished, applause rippled through the crowd, echoing against the barn's walls. In a final flourish, they offered samples of greenhouse salad and baked apple pastries, courtesy of a local bakery. The day ended with handshakes, friendly nods, and whispered admiration for what Clint and Angela had accomplished. After the last car departed, the farm stood tranquil again, bathed in late afternoon sunlight, exhausted but elated. Clint realized the orchard had never looked more alive. Spring gave way to a balmy summer, and the orchard made good on its promise. Apple blossoms that had painted the trees white and pink now swelled into small green apples, gradually reddening under the sun. The solar-powered irrigation system proved invaluable, managing water distribution even when the season's sporadic rains skipped Harrington Farm entirely. New clusters of wildflowers sprouted near the orchard edges, benefiting from the newly balanced soil conditions. In June, the first greenhouse harvest of the season rolled out, featuring robust cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers. Trucks from Evergreen Solutions arrived twice a week to collect crates of produce. Local grocers proudly displayed Harrington Farm labels, and sales receipts showed a steady uptick. Word spread that the farm was staging a comeback, stirring whispers of whether Clint might expand into new crops or even livestock again. Some older farmers who'd once scoffed at the solar panels now approached him for advice. Clint felt a strange mixture of humility and pride, mindful that without Angela's help, none of this would have come to fruition. Angela herself remained a near constant presence. While she traveled extensively for Evergreen Solutions, attending conferences, signing deals, she made time for regular check-ins with Clint. Sometimes those took the form of phone calls, sometimes video chats where she would greet him warmly before diving into spreadsheets on production targets. She'd ask for his input on everything from labor needs to marketing angles. Never once did she talk down to him, and that sense of respect forged a bond that transcended their initial agreement. In mid-July, the orchard began producing a modest but high-quality apple crop. Even the older trees that had appeared dead a year earlier now bore fruit, albeit in smaller quantities. Diana's forecasts were accurate. It was a preview harvest, with the real bounty expected next year. Nonetheless, the sweet, crisp apples that emerged this summer tasted like proof that Harrington Farm was back on its feet. One afternoon, Angela arrived with a camera crew to film promotional material. They captured shots of Clint plucking apples from the branches, a grin on his sunburned face. The orchard glowed in the background, leaves shimmering under a gentle breeze. Later that day, they filmed a brief interview in which Angela asked Clint to describe the journey from that bleak winter morning to now. Standing amid his orchard, he spoke about the desperation of almost losing his land, the moment he spotted Angela stranded on the roadside, and the unexpected partnership that saved them both in different ways. He didn't embellish, but his honesty painted a vivid picture. Sometimes, you do a good deed because it's the right thing, never expecting anything back. Then, out of nowhere, life hands you a second chance. Angela squeezed his shoulder, smiling. The footage was set to be part of an Evergreen Solutions mini-documentary on sustainable agriculture. Clint only half understood how digital outreach worked, but Angela assured him it would reach people far beyond their county. Despite lingering skepticism from a handful of neighbors, Harrington Farm now served as a beacon of possibility. Through it all, Clint was grateful for the orchard's new lease on life, for the heavy burdens of debt that no longer crushed him, and for a sense of renewed purpose he thought he'd lost with age. In this revitalized orchard, he found not just livelihood but dignity, living proof that kindness could yield a harvest more bountiful than any orchard alone. One late August evening, with the sun dipping low to cast long shadows across the orchard, Clint walked the rows in quiet reflection. The apples that remained were plump, almost ready for a final picking. A comfortable hush settled over the farm, the only sounds being a gentle rustling of leaves and the distant chatter of crickets. He paused before an old tree, one of the few remaining from his grandfather's era. It had survived storms, floods, neglect, and time. Yet here it stood, branches heavy with fruit, running a calloused hand over the trunk. Clint felt a surge of gratitude, reminiscent of something sacred. As he emerged from the orchard, he spotted Angela's SUV rolling up the driveway. She stepped out, wearing practical boots and jeans, her typical corporate polish replaced by an easygoing look. Though he hadn't expected her, he waved warmly, gesturing for her to join him near the barn. She approached with a smile, carrying 2 thermoses. "I know you love coffee," she said, handing him one. "Figured we could watch the sunset and enjoy a cup together." Clint accepted, marveling at how a woman who had once been a half-frozen stranger was now a steady ally. They strolled to an old wooden bench overlooking the orchard, settling down to watch the sky bleed into orange and pink. Taking a sip of coffee, Clint recalled that first cup of cocoa he'd shared with Angela in sub-zero temperatures. "Never thought this was how it'd all play out," he murmured, letting a soft laugh escape. Angela nodded, following his gaze across the farm. "You know, I've done a lot of deals," she said, "and traveled to countless countries for sustainable projects. But this place, it feels personal. It reminds me why I started Evergreen Solutions in the first place." Clint took a long moment to gather his thoughts. "I was desperate," he confessed, selling eggs and cider on a back road, about to lose the only home I've ever known. And you You were just a stranger, freezing. Maybe that day, we both needed something. You needed a coat, and I suppose I needed hope. Angela's eyes glistened in the fading light. It's rare in this world to find genuine kindness without an agenda. You could have passed me by. You didn't. Now look at what we've built. Silence enveloped them for a while, as the last streaks of sunlight stretched over the horizon. In that hush, the orchard seemed to breathe, a living monument to second chances. Angela finally spoke. So I leave tomorrow for a round of international meetings. Won't be back for a few months, but my team will keep everything on track. Clint nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. We'll hold down the fort. By the time you return, this orchard might surprise you even more. She laughed, light and genuine, then stood, extending her hand. Clint rose, and they shook in a gesture that felt more profound than any business formality. Thank you, she said simply, for saving me when I needed it most and for letting me save this farm. He nodded, clasping her hand gently. Safe travels, Angela. As her SUV disappeared down the path, Clint remained by the orchard until dusk settled into darkness. Eventually, he wandered back to the bench, gazing at the silhouettes of apple trees against a moonlit sky. He breathed in the sweet night air, his heart brimming with gratitude, because in that orchard, nurtured by kindness, he'd found a renewal of both land and spirit. If there was ever a testament to how a single act of compassion could ripple into something far larger, Harrington Farm was it, and it would stand as a beacon of hope long after the summer sun had set. As the sun set golden over Harrington Farm, Clint stood amid thriving apple trees and solar-powered greenhouses, a living testament to old-fashioned values meeting modern solutions. One small act of kindness on a frozen roadside had sparked a comeback worthy of classic American cinema, turning debt and despair into dignity and purpose. Friends, sometimes all it takes is a single moment of courage and compassion to rewrite our destiny, to reclaim our legacy. Have you ever experienced a turning point like Clint's, a simple gesture that changed everything? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's celebrate the spirit of resilience and brotherhood that defines us. Thanks for watching, and remember to hit that subscribe button for more heartwarming stories from the heartland of America.